Before she ever stood in a boardroom, she stood in line. Lines for housing assistance. Lines for second-hand groceries. Lines outside job fairs that ended in "we'll call you." She stood in lobbies with flickering lights and waited for appointments that never arrived. She stood behind desks, behind counters, behind those who pretended not to see her. Every time she reached for stability, someone handed her survival. But she never made a sound. She listened. She watched. She remembered. Her name was Ayanna. Born into a system designed to ignore her unless she failed. Raised by a mother who wore silence like armor and worked night shifts in a city that never loved her. Her mother taught her how to stretch a dollar and how to disappear inside a place without becoming part of it. She taught her how to observe the rules so she could learn to outgrow them. Ayanna worked her first job at 14 not because she wanted to, but because they needed electricity. She sorted receipts in the back of a pawn shop, hidden from customers, her only window a dusty screen showing lottery numbers on repeat. She learned then that people bet more often than they saved. She took notes. By 16, she was balancing school, work, and 3 side hustles. Not for fun, for food. She bought used textbooks and resold them. Cleaned apartments on weekends. Watched the children of women who worked 2 jobs to afford a room. She kept every receipt, logged every hour. Every dollar earned was a brick in something she couldn't see yet, but knew she was building. College came with scholarships that barely covered fees. The rest she covered herself. Financial aid forms, grants, 2 jobs, 3 nights spent copying notes she could barely read under flickering dorm hallway lights. She studied business not because it inspired her, but because it was the language of those who had always spoken over her. If she could master their language, she could rewrite her story. She didn't join clubs. She didn't party. She built. Her first investment wasn't in tech or stock. It was in herself. A $500 loan from a community co-op. She used it to buy inventory wholesale hair products and resold them to students and stylists out of a beat-up suitcase. She made triple back in 4 weeks. Reinvested. Expanded. Quiet. Relentless. By the time she graduated, she had no savings, but she had knowledge. And she was dangerous with it. The corporate world didn't want her. Not really. She got interviews. But her voice was too assertive. Her appearance too casual. Her resume, though qualified, was a stretch for this culture. One man told her she'd be a better fit in admin. She took their rejections and made them spreadsheets, analyzed them, found patterns in bias, and turned them into business plans. She launched a consultancy, not a flashy one. She offered admin support for small Black-owned businesses with no access to corporate infrastructure. Invoicing, contract negotiation, tax prep. She undercut the market by doing in one night what firms charged $100 an hour for. She learned every system they used, then built better ones. Clients grew. Word spread. She created templates, automation scripts, custom spreadsheets that calculated margins, inventory, licensing risk. She packaged them, sold them, reinvested every cent. She bought her first property at 26. A duplex no one wanted with rotting siding and broken plumbing. She lived upstairs, rented downstairs, fixed it room by room with YouTube tutorials and salvage supplies. Then she did it again and again. By 30, she had 7 properties, all in neighborhoods people avoided. She didn't renovate to flip. She restored to house. Tenants were women like her mother. Terms were honest. Prices fair. She made less per month than she could have, but she slept. She kept going. Then came the day she learned about acquisition. Not houses, companies. A client told her in passing about a friend whose tech startup was closing. Too many investors, not enough control. She offered to review the books for free. They laughed, then let her. She found inefficiencies in 12 hours that no one else saw in 12 months. Offered a buyout. All cash. No lawyers. Just transfer of ownership. They said yes. She kept the team. Rebuilt the model. Profited in 4 months. Then she disappeared from public view. Not from work. From noise. She stopped posting. Stopped explaining. And bought. One by one, she purchased broken pieces of industries too distracted to notice her. A packaging firm in Atlanta, a logistics startup in Houston, a cybersecurity team in Detroit. Each one small, each one overlooked. But she didn't need them loud, she needed them leveraged. By 35, she had amassed shares in 9 companies, 3 holding entities, and a real estate trust. All under shells. All quiet. She owned enough to influence, but never enough to expose. Until now. Because one of those investments, the quiet kind, had bloomed into something public. A national retail brand. Once dominant. Now struggling. The board needed a savior. They didn't know she already sat behind the curtain. And when the opportunity came to step forward, to stop advising from the back and take the room, she took it. She bought in. Majority. Silently. And then scheduled her first visit. Not to shock, but to shift the air. Because the moment they dismissed her presence as an error, she knew the room didn't need a new idea. It needed a new owner. The elevator was too quiet. Its walls mirrored her reflection in fractured angles, distorted panes of brass that showed her coat from one side, her jaw from another, and her eyes dead on. The floor display ticked upward slowly, a red glow counting down toward confrontation. Floor 33. Boardroom level. She exhaled once, short and invisible. Not nerve strategy. The security guard outside the conference suite didn't even glance at her badge. He looked at her face, then at her coat, and reached for the radio clip to his vest. The transmission was short. She could hear it through the earpiece. One word, unverified. They always said that when the face didn't match the expectation. He asked if she was looking for someone. Asked if she had an appointment. She didn't answer. She just handed him the envelope, thick, cream-colored, official. It had one name on the letterhead. Theirs. And one name on the contract. Hers. He didn't read it. He scanned it like a bouncer scanning a fake ID, waiting for the trick to reveal itself. But there was no trick. Just numbers. And control. When the second guard arrived, she was already walking past them. Calm. Deliberate. He called for confirmation. But by then, the door to the boardroom was open. And she was already stepping into the coldest place in the building. The table stretched 30 feet. Polished walnut. The windows behind it showed the skyline as if framed for conquest. 11 chairs filled the space, white shirts, gray suits, blue ties, smiles practiced to cut. They spoke in clipped tones, laughter like razors. No one paused. No one stood. They didn't see her. They saw what they wanted to see. An intruder. A mistake. A misplaced client. One of them gestured with his coffee cup, careless and dismissive. She stood at the far end where the leather chair remained empty. The one reserved for the outside money. She placed her phone on the table. Unlocked. Screen up. The room shifted subtly. A few glances. A murmur. One of them asked who she was supposed to be. Another laughed. Lost, someone offered. She didn't speak. She pressed play. The voice that filled the room wasn't hers. It was the CEO's. Recorded 2 weeks prior during a private call. Confirming the equity transfer. Confirming her position. Confirming her authority. The laughter stopped. One man stood. Another squinted. A third picked up his phone and began to scroll, frantically searching internal emails he hadn't read. Then came the moment. The chairman's voice cut through the tension, not strong, but strained. He stood slowly. Leaned forward. Asked her softly, then louder, who she was. Still, she didn't answer. She simply handed him a folder. Inside, the transaction. The purchase. The control clause. The updated board member roster. And there, at the top, beside the words lead strategic investor, her name. They stared. And for the first time, they saw her. Her skin. Her posture. Her silence. Not as signs of weakness, but as signs of power. The oldest man at the table, the one who called security, stood again. Red-faced. Blustering. His words were louder than his comprehension. He pointed. Demanded to know how she got in. Accused. Assumed. Declared that she had no right. That this was a closed meeting. That someone needed to fix this. And then, the moment that would become myth. He turned to the guard by the door. Security. Remove this woman. No one moved. Because the guard had already seen the folder. Already understood the weight of it. Already felt the shift in the room like a dropped anchor. The man's voice faltered. The echo of his command hung in the air for a beat too long. It dissolved. Irrelevant. She walked past him slowly. Not in defiance. In confirmation. She reached the head of the table. pulled out the chair, and sat. The room didn't breathe, because no one knew how to exhale under someone else's control. She opened her notebook. Not a laptop, not a tablet. Handwritten, clean, sharp. She flipped to the marked page and began. No monologue, no announcement, just the quiet sound of a pen against paper, and the realization that the room now belonged to someone else. They didn't know her story. They didn't see the years she spent becoming someone they would never suspect. They just saw the surface and judged. And now that judgment sat at the head of their table. Because power doesn't shout. It signs the checks. The first meeting ended in silence. No one argued. No one welcomed her. The air in the boardroom turned brittle, like glass on the verge of cracking under its own weight. The men sat straighter, adjusted their cuffs, checked their watches. Not because they needed the time, but because posture was all they had left. She had rewritten the hierarchy in a single appearance, and now every breath inside that room had to pass through her name. But Ayanna didn't stay to savor the discomfort. She closed her notebook, stood, nodded once, and left. She wasn't interested in spectacle. She had no need to prove herself to anyone who thought proof required volume. Her next steps weren't for their benefit. They were for the building beneath them. The elevator descended like a slow exhale. At the lobby level, marble floors echoed beneath her shoes as she passed the front desk. The same receptionist who didn't look up when she entered earlier now sat perfectly still, watching her cross the space like a phantom who had rewritten gravity. She stepped outside, and the city swallowed her again. The building she just bought part of was only one small node in a much larger map. Over the next week, she walked through every floor. No PR team, no cameras, no handshakes, just observation. She walked the design department, where overlooked interns ran million-dollar concepts past managers who took credit. She saw the warehouse schedules, stacked with overnights that burned through low-paid labor like kindling. She read vendor contracts with late fees larger than employee bonuses. She read between the lines of invoices that screamed exploitation in perfect grammar. She wasn't shocked. She was ready. She held meetings in side rooms instead of boardrooms, called in staff individually, not to interrogate but to listen. She met the people who did the real work, the receptionist who solved delivery delays with a spreadsheet no one acknowledged, the warehouse lead who saved $40,000 in shipping fees but never got credit, the coder who built a back-end tool on her own time that stabilized the site and was still labeled junior. Anna watched. Then she acted. Within 2 weeks, she replaced 3 department heads. Quietly, contracts were restructured. Bonuses tied to performance but tracked by data she controlled. Job titles were updated, not based on favoritism but function. People noticed. Whispers moved faster than memos. One floor started calling her the architect. Another, the ghost CEO. She didn't mind either, because in truth both were accurate. She didn't need a title. She had equity. In the next board meeting, the energy was different. Still stiff. Still uncomfortable. But quiet. She walked in, laid down a folder, and passed it to the chairman first. Inside, a full audit report. Every inefficiency. Every redundancy. Every place the business was leaking both money and credibility. And next to it, a plan. Restructure. Modernize. Diversify. Not as a slogan, but as a structure. Her ideas weren't radical. They were efficient. The board didn't argue. They voted 9-2 in favor of her plan. Because power, when paired with results, becomes unshakable. And Ayanna brought both. Outside the meetings, rumors spread. Not about her work. About her presence. They didn't understand her silence. Mistook it for submission. They whispered theories. Maybe she was a figurehead. Maybe she had rich connections. Maybe she would sell in 6 months and vanish. They didn't understand. This wasn't a flip. This was foundation. She attended no galas, sat on no panels, posted nothing on social media. But one morning, a LinkedIn post from a former executive went viral. It read, "I told her she didn't belong in the boardroom. Now I answer to her." The comments were brutal, but Ayanna never responded. She was in a small conference room that morning interviewing a single mother for a junior finance role. She hired her on the spot, not for her resume, but because the woman described balancing 3 jobs while studying for her certification on her phone between shifts. Ayana recognized the hunger, recognized herself. Later that month, she launched an internal development program. Fully funded. Anonymous applications. No degree required. She named it after her mother. It wasn't PR. It was repair. By the end of the quarter, revenue had increased by 14%. Efficiency by 23%. Retention by 31%. She presented none of these figures. The numbers spoke louder than her voice ever needed to. The board stopped asking where she came from. They started asking where they were going. She didn't answer them directly. She pointed to the blueprint and kept building. It didn't take long for her changes to ripple upward. What started as whispers among junior staff turned into patterns the senior leadership could no longer ignore. Reports came in ahead of deadline. Metrics improved. Customer satisfaction scores, once flatlined, now spiked like pulse readings from a resuscitated body. Ayana didn't change the company overnight. She rewired its spine, thread by thread, policy by policy. But she didn't walk through the office like a savior. She walked like a surveyor. She didn't smile unless she meant it. She didn't ask rhetorical questions. Every conversation had purpose, and every purpose ended in motion. She didn't perform her intelligence. She lived inside it. They weren't used to that. One executive, a man who had once handed her his coffee cup assuming she was catering staff, resigned without a word after his department was quietly absorbed into a leaner team she restructured. Another, who once complained about her tone, found himself reporting to a woman he once refused to mentor because Ayana had promoted her without ceremony. The building itself had begun to change temperature. She introduced new hiring policies, blind reviews, anonymous assessments, salary transparency between levels. No more guessing who was underpaid. No more gatekeeping entry points with culture fit excuses. The HR lead resisted at first, so she replaced him. The new head was a single mother with a background in restorative justice and a track record for rewriting equity frameworks from scratch. Her first move, scrub bias from the promotion algorithm the company used for leadership tracking. Ayana didn't stop her. She funded her. While others were protecting tradition, Ayana was designing the future. Still, not everyone adjusted. Some tolerated her presence in the room but never respected it. They whispered behind closed doors, referred to her as the storm, the disruptor, the silent knife. One senior partner tried to rally others to freeze her out. Sent a private email chain calling her emotionally detached and potentially reckless. The email found its way back to her. She didn't fire him. She made him present her new quarterly strategy deck to the entire investor group. Line by line, slide by slide, word for word. She sat in the back of the room. Didn't blink once. He made it through 12 minutes before resigning. She didn't acknowledge his departure. She was already onboarding someone else. Her style wasn't revenge. It was structure. She launched a fund under the company's new ESG arm, focused on investing in businesses run by formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs. It was controversial, but the numbers were unarguable. ROI after 6 months surpassed 2 legacy portfolios. One of the businesses, a sustainable packaging firm out of Newark, landed an international contract 3 times its valuation. When asked by a financial journalist why she believed in such risky models, Ayana offered no quote. She simply linked the data. She didn't campaign for approval. She presented results like receipts. Her power wasn't in her presence. It was in the system she rebuilt. And the system was spreading. Other departments began mimicking her practices without her asking. Other companies reached out, first quietly, then publicly. They wanted to know her frameworks, her mentorship program, her development tracks. She shared nothing, because she wasn't done yet. She spent her weekends in silence, back at her original apartment in the building she still owned, walking the same floorboards she once couldn't afford to heat. It grounded her, reminded her. She never let herself float too far above the ground she came from. One night, a letter arrived at her office. No return address. Inside, a photo, blurry, black and white. A woman in coveralls sitting on a folding chair, holding a clipboard, eyes closed in exhaustion. On the back, her mother's name, written in shaky pencil. Anna framed it, hung it beside the door to her personal office, not as decoration but as compass. She made no announcement, But every employee who passed that door from then on saw it, saw the origin, and the result. No plaque, just presence. And they understood. This company didn't just have a new investor. It had a new memory. A memory that watched every decision, every policy, every hire. Because the woman they once tried to remove now owned more than their equity. She owned the future they didn't know how to design. The annual investor summit arrived like it always did, dripping in rehearsed opulence and hushed condescension. Crystal chandeliers, chef-curated menus, corporate-branded notebooks stacked neatly beside nameplates engraved in gold. The hall buzzed with conversations masked as compliments, handshakes that measured status, and laughter that never reached anyone's eyes. It was theater disguised as leadership. Ayanna entered through a side door, not because she was hiding, because she didn't need the main entrance to make a statement. The room didn't quiet when she walked in, not immediately. She wasn't dressed to command attention. No designer logos, no power red suit. Just an immaculately tailored black ensemble and the stillness of someone who knew they belonged deeper than the room could comprehend. She walked past tables arranged for legacy names, past the hedge fund managers who once laughed at her proposal sheets, past the man who once told her that growth requires pedigree. They all saw her now, but it was too late. The presentation began with numbers. The CEO spoke confidently at first: revenue growth, reduced overhead, rising customer satisfaction. Ayanna sat silently beside the chairman, her expression unreadable. He hadn't slept well in days. The boardroom that once obeyed his voice now answered to data she orchestrated. Every slide that hit the screen bore fingerprints he didn't recognize but couldn't dispute. When the COO detailed their new equity infrastructure model, he failed to mention who had built it. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. The summit's final hour was reserved for strategy. It was always a ritual. The vision speech, delivered by the board chair, followed by polite applause and hors d'oeuvres. But this year, Ayanna requested that time. The chairman hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked to the front with no fanfare. No speech notes, no projections, just a folder. She opened it slowly, pulled out a document. Slide 1, a company acquisition. Gasps rippled through the room. Not because the company was unknown, because it was one of their own. Private acquisition. Finalized. Silent. Total. Ayanna had bought out the founding partner's shares. Quietly. Legally. Completely. He had sold them, liquidating to cover debts he thought no one had noticed. She had noticed, and she had waited. The room stilled. Slide 2, her new position. Majority controlling partner. No voting thresholds. No backdoor clauses. Final. One man stood, pale. He stammered something about due process. Another flipped through the investor packet, hands shaking. The chairman simply sat down. Because it was done. The paperwork was filed. The ink dry. The structure changed. Anna didn't gloat. She continued. Slide 3. A vision statement. Not her face. Not her name. Just 3 words. People. Power. Permanence. The next 20 minutes redefined everything. She laid out a 5-year plan built not around market trends but human needs. Restructured compensation models. A profit-sharing system. Re-entry programs. A rolling investment fund seeded from surplus revenues that would directly back small businesses founded by employees. She revealed a new department. Foundation strategy. It wasn't optional. It was infrastructure. The company wouldn't just give back. It would build in. One executive whispered that it was idealism. He didn't realize his microphone was still on. The room laughed nervously. Anna didn't. She paused, waited, then turned to him. Slide 4 appeared. It detailed the department he once ran. Now eliminated. Replaced with something leaner, smarter, faster. She said nothing. The numbers said everything. No one laughed again. By the end of her presentation, she closed the folder. No applause. No standing ovation. Just a long silence that felt heavier than gold. Afterward, people approached her in waves. Some offering congratulations. Others offering apologies dressed as compliments. A few simply quiet. Eyes lowered. Not in shame but realization. They hadn't lost a seat at the table. They had never owned it. She walked out the same way she entered. No spotlight, just gravity. Back in her office that evening, she stood by the window, watching the city flicker like pixels. On her desk sat a single envelope, an offer from a global conglomerate to buy out her equity. 9 figures, all cash. She didn't open it. She fed it into the shredder without hesitation. Because what she was building couldn't be sold. It wasn't a company. It was correction. It wasn't profit. It was permanence. That night, she met with her senior staff. Not in suits, not in offices, but in the break room. She brought food. No agenda, just presence. They laughed, shared stories. One assistant, new, young, bright-eyed, asked her what it felt like to run it all. Anna just smiled, then handed her a set of keys to a small corner office, and said nothing, because legacy didn't need to be spoken. It just needed to be handed forward. The headlines came fast, faster than truth. Unknown woman seizes control of multimillion-dollar firm. Silent takeover. The boardroom disruption no one saw coming. From invisible to untouchable. Who is Ayanna E? The media needed a narrative. They needed origin myths, struggle arcs, and triumphant sound bites. But Ayanna didn't grant interviews. She didn't sit for documentaries or allow exposés. When journalists requested quotes, they received silence or numbers. And slowly, the world began to understand. She wasn't chasing attention. She was building something attention couldn't hold. Inside the company, the shift became permanent. The front lobby's glass walls were no longer filled with framed awards and photos of founders in tuxedos. Now they held rotating exhibits, portraits of workers, stories behind major initiatives, QR codes linking to employer-written blogs. The space no longer whispered power. It breathed it, authentically. Ayanna's office remained sparse. A desk, a chair, 2 books, 1 plant, and the photo of her mother still hung behind her, faded now but more permanent than anything digital. Every time she entered the room, she nodded once. A habit, a ritual, a reminder. She began transferring responsibilities one by one, not to copies of herself, to people who thought differently, who spoke up, who hesitated, who cared. She wasn't building succession. She was building succession networks. Layers of readiness, not just one heir. And when they asked about her exit strategy, she smiled. Because it was already happening. Every policy she changed, every department she decentralized, every structure she rewrote. That was the exit. Not the leaving, but the staying long after she was gone. She turned down a speaking engagement at a global summit. Instead, she guest lectured at a local high school on the South Side. No cameras, no press. Just a whiteboard, a dry erase marker, and students who didn't yet know how valuable their voices were. She wrote a single sentence on the board. Ownership doesn't start with money. It starts with memory. Then erased it. Not to hide it. To prove that memory doesn't need permanence to be felt. Elsewhere, her competitors scrambled. They mimicked her models, copied her initiatives, rebranded their companies with words like impact and sustainability. But it rang hollow. Because they treated change like theater. Ayanna had treated it like breath. She continued investing. But not in stocks. In systems. She funded an independent think tank to study long-term equity design, not philanthropy, but power. She backed co-ops, land trusts, rural broadband access, all under LLCs that bore no trace of her name. That was the point. Meanwhile, her original company thrived. Employees stopped looking over their shoulders. Leadership positions turned over without panic. The culture became self-sustaining. One day, without warning, she vacated her corner office. Left it empty. No send-off. No ceremony. Just a handwritten note taped to the wall. This room belongs to the next decision. And that was it. She was gone. Not from the world, but from the center. She boarded a flight. No destination made public. Her phone went dark. The system stayed lit. Some called it a retirement. Others a strategic withdrawal. They were all wrong. It wasn't an exit. It was an expansion. Because Ayanna had never needed the spotlight. She was the architecture. Every company that traced itself back to her name owed its backbone to a woman they once tried to remove from a room. She never wrote a memoir. Never branded a lifestyle. Never turned her journey into merchandise. But one day, in a lecture hall at a university she never attended, a professor began class with a quote. Power isn't given. It's purchased in silence and applied in structure. Iona E. Soul. And the students scribbled it down, not knowing that she had already rewritten the building they sat in. Far away, on a quiet coast, she walked barefoot through sand. No one recognized her. No one asked for her name. She smiled quietly. Because for the first time in her life, she didn't have to own the room. She had become the floor it stood on.